start with this. A fight of some significance, some consequence in the women's featherweight division. Set to go down in Argentina. Brenda Carabajal will be taking on Brazil's own Danila Ramos for what is the WBO interim title, the title that could lead the winner to an Amanda Serrano fight. Brenda Carabajal
of Argentina.
Very experienced fighter. Been around the block a few times.
Fought some really good fighters.
Serrano, Rose Volante, Argentinian legend Marcela Acuña, former WBO champion Johanna Belen Alfonso.
Sporting a professional record of 18 wins with 5 losses, 1 draw.
9 knockouts. She suffered some losses. She has. Some ups, some downs. But she's only ever lost to fighters that compete at a certain level. And I'm not sure that's Danila Ramos. Danila Ramos, who sports a professional record of 11 wins with 2 losses, no draws.
1 knockout. Only 1 recorded knockout.
Having campaigned as high as super featherweight and as low as bantamweight, it seems she's found her way to the women's featherweight division and is vying to become a WBO champion by way of this WBO interim title fight. The winner of the fight, whoever it is, whether it's Brenda or Danila, will go on to either challenge Amanda Serrano straight away or become champion in her absence.
Because Amanda Serrano very recently inked a pact with the PFL to resume her mixed martial arts career, it's conceivable that she's not going to stick around boxing much longer, and she may vacate all the titles she won at featherweight.
The winner of this fight, whoever it is, will be crowned WBO interim champion and be in a pole position to either challenge Amanda straight away if Amanda squeezes in another fight this year, or be elevated to full champion once Amanda vacates. And I think that might be right around the corner.
Yeah.
Still enough time left in this year that if Amanda Serrano so chooses, she can squeeze in another fight in either the fall or winter months, right before she resumes her MMA career with the PFL.
We'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Slight edge to Brenda Carabajal to win this weekend's fight, set to go down in Buenos Aires, Argentina at Luna Park, the famed Luna Park, the site of many relevant fights in the Argentinian boxing scene. She's got home field advantage, Brenda. She is 6 years younger than Brazil's own Danila Ramos, albeit less active than Danila. Danila is 38 years old, whereas Brenda is 32.
Hasn't been that active the last 3 years.
Dropped a decision to Serrano in February of 2020. That was the only fight she had that year. That's the year the pandemic hit. The following year, in 2021, she only saw action once, rebounding off the loss to Sarah opposite the ring, Lillian Silva. That was in November.
November of 2021 and May of 2022, last year. She shared the ring with her countrywoman, former champion Deborah Dionysius, won a majority decision.
Brenda's got home field advantage, and Brenda is younger than Danila, but she hasn't been that active. She's been averaging 1 fight a year for the last 3 or 4 years.
Hasn't fought at all this year.
Danila, at least in the last 12 months, has been a little bit more active. Last year, she saw action in April just once last year, and she saw action more recently this year back in February. So she has had a fight in the last 12 months.
This will be her second fight of this year.
So I edge Brenda Carabajal to win, and I edge Brenda to win on points. One of 4 potential mandatory challengers that will be waiting in the queue for Amanda Serrano to either give them a title shot or vacate the titles.
It's quite possible that Amanda may elect to toggle between boxing and mixed martial arts, though given that she's been boxing for such a long time and is already so accomplished in the sport, there's actually no need to toggle between the 2 different disciplines. She might decide to go all in the world of mixed martial arts.
She does. Former WBA champion of Mexico, Erica Cruz, who's supposed to be in action very soon opposite the ring, Melissa Odessa Parker. She's ranked at number 1.
By way of the WBC.
By way of the WBA, Germany's own Nina Menke, Nina the Brave, Nina the Southpaw. She's ranked at number 1 by way of the WBA. By way of the WBO, Brenda Carabajal, who we just talked about, she's ranked at number 1 by way of the IBF.
Sarah Mahfoud, former IBF champion Sarah Mahfoud, is ranked at number 1 by way of the IBF. These are names you want to remember because these could be the next wave of champions once Amanda vacates, if she so decides to.
She might. Learning one discipline is hard enough without having to toggle between the 2, between boxing and mixed martial arts. If she vacates all those alphabet titles,
every single one of those aforementioned fighters could be elevated to full champion status.
what could be the altered landscape at 126 in the very near future as it pertains to Carabajal versus Ramos, I've got Brenda Carabajal winning a points decision this weekend at Luna Park, Buenos Aires, Argentina.
Become this division's WBO interim champion.
And super middleweight news, the kickoff press conference for the battle of the undisputed champions. The undisputed champion at 154 versus the undisputed champion at 168, Jermell Charlo versus Canelo Alvarez. Jamel, who says, hopefully after the fight, Canelo can let everyone know I'm one of the most dangerous fighters he's fought, as Jermell Charlo is coming to showcase himself to the world.
The face-off between the two and the noticeable height and size differential, those making the case that Jermell, he's a small guy, that Canelo's bringing up a little guy, up 2 divisions.
They didn't have a problem with that when Errol Spence fought Mikey Garcia.
He put off the Crawford fight to fight Mikey.
They didn't have a problem with that then, so I don't see why they're clutching at their pearls now. Canelo Alvarez's biggest critics, even though Jermell is not actually a smaller man than Canelo Alvarez. Just because he cuts more weight than Canelo doesn't mean he's smaller than Canelo. There's nothing small about him.
He's a taller, longer fighter than Canelo Alvarez. You can see that. And they probably walk around at or around the same weight. The only real difference between them is that all this time, Jermell has been cutting more weight than Canelo.
What might work against him, that even though Jermell may feel somewhat more invigorated and energized fighting at 168 and not having to boil down to 154 anymore, he's not acclimated to 168. This is the first time he will have fought there, and it's not against just any old body. It's against Canelo Alvarez, who's fully acclimated to this weight and accustomed to taking punches there, delivering punches there.
Jermell isn't.
Just isn't. Even if you feel that Canelo Alvarez is now on the slide, approximately 60 or over 60 professional bouts, having been a professional since age 15, even if you think he's in decline, starting to slip, and he's on the slide.
Even if you think that's what's working against him, this is what's working against Jermell, that he hasn't fought in over a year's time. He's supposed to be coming right off an injury, and he is not acclimated to this weight. This is not Brian Castano you're fighting.
This is Canelo Alvarez, and you're going into this fight having not fought in over a year's time, carrying more weight into the match than you've ever carried into any match, into any fight. The ingredients for a fighter to perhaps get off to a decent start, but fade down the stretch.
And how too much time off makes a fighter flat.
It's your intention to put on a similar performance to the one that you put on opposite the ring Brian Castano, the shorter, stumpier fighter looking to close the distance to get off shots. If you're telling yourself you're going to do that to Canelo has seen action in the last 12 months.
Right.
You haven't.
Right.
And it was a great performance that he put on opposite the ring Brian Castano, but that kind of a performance, that strategy, relies on timing the smaller fighter on the way in. That relies on sharpness, speed, reflexes, mobility, and cardio, all of which Jermell hasn't had to use in over a year.
He's got ring rust.
Ring rust has a bad habit of showing up at the darndest times in the darndest places. Both Canelo Alvarez and Jermell Charlo jointly were asked about Terence Crawford,
But Terence being a potential opponent for either of them.
Canelo said Crawford was the best man that night, and if they fight again, it's going to be the same thing. He's a better fighter. I respect Spence, and I like Spence, but Crawford has everything.
He does.
That's how Canelo Alvarez feels about it. While dismissing a fight with Terence at a catch weight of 158 pounds, I can't go down anymore. Like he said when they asked him about fighting Gervonta Davis, it's the same for me. Everybody's going to say he's too small. Nobody's going to give me credit for that.
Some people are already trying to deprive him of credit for this. Credit for fighting Jermell Charlo. The same people that were applauding Errol fighting a lightweight, moving up 2 divisions to welter.
They're mad that Jermell is moving up 2 divisions for Canelo.
They don't make any fucking sense.
Never do, because the name of Jermell Charlo, alongside his brother Jermall, those were 2 of the fighters. The laundry list of names they've been pestering Canelo Alvarez with for years now, claiming that he was avoiding these fighters, avoiding Jermell, avoiding Jermall, avoiding David Benavidez, avoiding Demetrius Andrade, so that when he finally buckles down and fights one of them,
Bear in mind, he's more accomplished than all of them.
they want to cry about it, they want to complain, they want to pretend that somehow Jermell Charlo Charlo is this tiny little fighter, this very little guy, because he's still campaigning as a junior middle, even though he could easily make middle or super middle.
People are never happy.
But I am perfectly okay with this fight. As it pertains to Canelo versus Crawford, that was never realistic. Now, Jermell Charlo versus Crawford.
As it pertains to that,
Jermell Charlo stated, after this, we will see what we can do with Terence Crawford. Yet another fight that I'm not convinced is all that realistic. Not really. Jermell Charlo, if he wins against Canelo Alvarez, there may be a second fight for even more money than the first. That's if he wins. If he loses,
he's not coming back down. After having made all that money at 168, he's not going to kill himself to make 154.
I don't think so, though. That is a story that only time can tell. I'm not convinced that after making all that dough at 168, he's going to boil down to junior middle. That's just not the way things happen. That's not the way things work.
He said they'll see what they can do about making that fight between him and Terence Crawford. That's what he said, but people say a lot of things. What he had to say about his old buddy Errol losing to Terence Crawford.
Believes Terence Crawford landed a lot of shots behind the head versus his old buddy Errol. Rabbit punches. He said Errol had a bad night. It was nothing that made me be like, oh, Crawford's something spectacular. He didn't throw that many punches. I don't know why none of you are talking about some of these behind-the-head shots and shit that you don't mention. I saw a bunch of behind-the-head shots during that fight.
It's bullshit.
It's just more bullshit. People making excuses for Errol Spence Jr. The very first knockdown that Terence Crawford scored in the second round was off a jab and a straight, not a shot that sailed around the head.
It wasn't a rabbit punch that knocked down Errol Spence Jr. in the second round, and after the second round, it was all downhill from there.
Scored a knockdown off a jab and a straight, another knockdown off a uppercut hook combination, neither of which sailed around the guard, yet another knockdown off a right hook, a short counter right hook.
Jermell is making excuses, that's all it is, and that's what I expect him to do when it comes to his old buddy getting his ass kicked like that.
That's all it is. After being called out during the fight by Terence Crawford, do you expect Jermell Charlo to sing his praises? Do you expect Jermell Charlo to lavish compliments on Terence?
Of course not.
And as it pertains to fighting Terence, well, Terence called him out quite publicly on a very big stage. So of course he'll say, we'll see what we can do. We'll see if we can't make the Crawford fight after the Canelo fight. Under pressure to respond, he's going to say whatever he has to say, but realistically, it's not realistic.
If he beats Canelo, he might fight him again for more money. If he doesn't beat him, if he gets knocked out, he might take some time off, spend some of the money he made, but I don't think he goes back to 54.
We all know what the rule of thumb is, at least in men's boxing. The men don't fluctuate in weight as easily as the women do. So when you go up, you're not supposed to come back down. People say a lot of things before a fight. He can say what he wants now. My diagnosis? I'm not convinced he returns to junior middleweight. Just don't. As it pertains to a potential Errol Spence Jr. rematch, Showtime's Stefan Espinoza has said Errol Spence remains adamant that he intends to rematch Terence Crawford. The one thing that's absolutely the case is that Spence wants the rematch. The question is, as a team, do all his advisors agree that's the best way to go?
You already know what I think would happen in a rematch.
Especially if it's an immediate rematch. Though there being a rematch doesn't mean it has to be immediate. I mean, I'm of the belief that Errol Spence Jr. went against the grain and went against his advisor's advice to move up to 154 and take on Keith Thurman. He elected to box Terence Crawford instead. Essentially, he's already gone against the grain once.
He's gonna do it again?
What his advisors and the people in his team might advise him to do in this situation is, if you really want to have that second fight, you can have it, but it doesn't have to be straight away. It doesn't have to be this year, even though the rematch clause itself stipulates that the loser of the fight will have 30 days from the fight to activate it.
Even if the rematch clause expires and Errol don't fight him again this year, they can still do the second fight next year.
Fairly confident that Terence Crawford would be receptive to a second fight, irrespective of the existing rematch clause. I'm sure that at 154, he wouldn't mind running it back.
I don't think it would go any differently. It was Bob Arum who said it best.
Spence can fight a lefty, and nobody even mentioned that. Look at Spence's body of work. Of all those fights, he only fought two southpaws. Terence's big strength is that he fights equally well from either side. So instead of opening up as a right-hander, which he usually does, and then switching to southpaw, He only fought Spence as a southpaw, and Spence couldn't handle it.
Were you surprised, though, by how dominant he was?
He can't fight a southpaw. Crawford had fought him 5 or 6 rounds. As an orthodox fighter, it would have been a different fight. What's he going to learn how to fight a southpaw now? As long as Terence fights him from the southpaw stance, the result will be the same at 154, 160, 175.
I myself here on this channel told you that Terence Crawford would start off that fight out of the southpaw stance because Errol's not used to it. He's not used to fighting other southpaws, let alone southpaws with a base style that doesn't do his any favors.
So many have focused on the weight, as if that was the only impediment, and what other intangibles they've now decided are relevant now that he's lost.
It's never occurred to them that in all those fights Errol Spence Jr. has had, he doesn't have much experience with southpaws. In the amateurs, 1 or 2 southpaws gave him a lot of problems. In the pros, he didn't fight all that many.
That was by design.
So now that the smoke is settled and the outcome is decided, if he really wants that second fight, if he wants the chance to redeem himself and run it back, it doesn't behoove him to take on Terence Crawford straight away.
You move up to 154, you fight Brian Mendoza for either the WBC interim or full title. If it becomes vacant, let Terence take care of Tim Tszyu and you take care of Brian.
Doesn't actually remedy the problem that Terence Crawford's base style doesn't do Errol's any favors, and that so long as he's fighting out of the southpaw stance, Errol won't have any answers for him. No, none of this remedies that problem, but it does give Errol the chance to rebound, to recover.
Try and acclimate to 154 because it's going to be a new weight for the both of them. It's going to be a new weight for Errol. It's going to be a new weight for Terence. They've got to get used to it.
I don't think the outcome of the match is actually contingent upon getting used to fighting as a junior middleweight, but for all those convinced that weight was the only impediment,
Then let him acclimate first.
given how one-sided the first fight was, the second one might be a tough sell, as there's actually no need for a second fight, no need for a rematch. That was a decisive victory, but if he is insistent upon having it, he should have at least one confidence-building fight in between.
To build himself back up and to help build the rematch.
Myself, I don't think the weight is going to make the least bit of difference. He's still going to be the same fighter with the same tendencies, the same holes in his game, and the same predictable offense.
But if he wants to get a little bit more mileage out of his career, he should take a fight in between, see about fighting Terence late next year. If he fights him straight away, Terence might retire him.
You can't take 2 beatings like that back-to-back and come back the same guy. It's his decision.
It's up to Errol.